allow for that. We're just going to be launching now. Yeah.
Is my visual okay? You're muted.
Yes, please. Hi, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Jignesh as well. Welcome all of you to the webinar for today. We are going to be focusing on development regulations for EV ready buildings. This is part of a four-part webinar series that we are doing, focusing on different aspects of EV adoption in cities in India. And I welcome you to the conversation today. I'm going to ask my colleagues to please share slides that allows us to take the conversation further. Next, please. Next. So this is the agenda that we're going to be following. We have a number of panelists from different perspectives. They're going to share their thoughts on what is required and what are the challenges and opportunities for making buildings EV ready in cities. I'm going to be introducing all of the panelists and the facilitator as we move ahead. And towards the end, we're going to have a question and answer session, including final remarks. So I wanted to share a few housekeeping rules. We are going to be recording this session. The participants are requested to be on mute, and panelists can keep their videos on. If you have any questions or points to share as we proceed with the conversation, please type it into the chat box or question and answer section. And majorly, we're going to be having the conversation in English with a little bit of Hindi added, just in case we require flexibility in conversation. If you have anything in addition to the conversation that we have today, feel free to reach us out. We'd be happy to connect and discuss further. Next, please. So a little bit about us. We are ICLEI. ICLEI is a local governments association, a global association of cities and regions. We work with cities and citizens in cities, trying to make sure that the quality of life of citizens in cities is good through various initiatives. You know about us, I assume, as an association that's active in India, working with cities. EV adoption happens to be an area of focus and interest, mainly because the government in India is focusing and supporting EV adoption in a big way, and we feel cities, being the location where most of the action of EV adoption is going to be playing out, are very important players in this movement. And for that, we are focusing on what cities can do. When we say cities, we do not mean only city municipal governments, but we mean all of the government actors that come together at the city, as well as stakeholders who need to work together for EV adoption to be successful. Next. So this engagement that this conversation comes out of mainly focuses on our work that we did looking at 10 cities across India. The purpose was mainly to understand what's happening on EV adoption across various cities in the country. And in that, with that interest, we went about interacting with government officials as well as private stakeholders, dealers, everybody who's involved in some way or another with EV adoption in these geographies, and try to understand what's happening on ground and what additional needs to be done if we want to see an accelerated EV adoption in our country. Next. What we found was majority of the cities are mainly looking at executing actions that seem to be priority or easy to do, or are facilitated, supported by national, state government initiatives, or are supported by partner organizations that are working with them. What we found is that even though few of the cities like Surat or Delhi as a city-state have an integrated policy and are thinking about it, work in progress mode, we do not have an approach that helps cities plan for EV adoption with all of the various aspects that need to be considered over a longer period of time. And this is what we are recommending to cities, city governments, that an approach that looks at strategizing based on a vision that you set for yourself, discussing with various stakeholders on what should be the priority actions to be taken up, working with number of stakeholders together to be able to decide on how to proceed ahead, use those findings to actually take action on ground, evaluate how the actions are faring over a period of time, and fine-tune your approach for accelerated adoption to move ahead. This kind of an approach needs to be in place on ground, and almost all of the city governments that we spoke with agreed that it would be useful to follow an approach like this moving ahead. So this is what we are recommending to the cities, and out of this engagement have come out a number of documents that are based on the findings and learnings from the city engagements. We have developed e-mobility action plans for the city of Kochi, Rajkot, and Surat, recommendation documents for EV charging provision in development control regulations in Surat and Rajkot, and a strategy for municipal fleet electrification for Rajkot and Kochi. All of the learnings that we have from the 10 cities come together in the form of a guideline and planning approach document that is also available now online for people to access and learn from. Next. So this, I think we discussed in the past, and you all know about it. We don't need to focus on this, but the general, I think, message from the slide is that EV's ecosystem in India is developing, is expanding. Readiness of buildings to cater to demand for EV charging is a focus area that requires attention, that needs more to be done, together with localization of EV supply chain that the national government is focusing on in a big way. So coming to the point of discussion today, why buildings need to be EV ready. So we have a national target in place, and cities and local governments need to be part of this transition. There is long-term planning required, especially for the next 10 years. We need to be having a plan of how we are doing this. We are already seeing rise in EVs. Further rise will lead to increase in charging requirements. Residential and workplace charging are preferred by owners. This is known information. We all know about it. We are aware about it. And so for need for parking and charging areas for EVs at these locations is something that needs to be provided for, in addition to thinking for how load management would need to be handled during peak hours when demand is really high. So generally, what are EV ready buildings? There are different levels of EV readiness in buildings, buildings that are EV capable, that are EV ready or EV enabled, mainly focusing on considerations for new buildings, but also including existing buildings, which might require retrofitting as a large number of residents start to own and use, prefer EV vehicles. Next. So what we found in our conversations and through the background research that we did was that we have in place systems and policies that do not stop us from going ahead and making buildings EV ready. We have national level policies, we have state level policies that encourage buildings that provide for charging at the building level. However, when we come down to the details, to the specifics, on ground in cities where these execution of implementation of charging infrastructure at the building level is required, a lot is still needed in terms of the understanding, in terms of the understanding not only of the stakeholders, but also of the government as well as advisors in terms of what needs to happen, how it will happen, a mapping or and detailed plan of what is required on ground over a period of time, something that will require to keep changing as demand and users of EVs keep increasing on ground. The discoms are a very important part of this conversation, wherein they would need to provide for infrastructure so that this load can be provided, and number of buildings that are there in the cities have the kind of capacity to be able to charge EVs. Next, please. So I think that in the conversation today, we want to focus on these aspects: uncertainty of demand of EV infrastructure. What do we do if we are not very sure about that? Concerns that are there from different actors like building developers, property owners, managers like resident welfare associations. How do we address those concerns? What is the kind of coordination efforts that can be put in place between government departments to make sure that regulations work, and it is not something that becomes a exercise so cumbersome that people decide not to go ahead and take up an EV? What would be the EV load implications on sanctioned loads, especially during peak hours, and if we have any conversations of thinking around that? And most important, where all of the conversation finally comes to, are the cost implications of this infrastructure that we are saying we need to be providing for in new buildings or in existing buildings as the need increases. So these are some of the points that we want to be focusing on today's conversation. Can we go to the next slide, please? And for the conversation, we have with us a very interesting panel. The panel consists of Dr. Rahul Tongia, who's a senior fellow with CSEP and leads the Energy and Natural Resources and Sustainability group there. His work spans entire gamut of energy and electricity focus, including renewable energy, smart grids, and broader issues of reforms and regulations, including electricity pricing. He was also the founder, technical member of Government of India's Smart Grid Task Force, and is a fellow of the National Academy of Engineering. We also have with us Sir Vinod Kalla, who's the founder of Emergent Ventures India, has over 30 years of industry experience focusing on clean energy, sustainability, strategic management, and finance. We also have with us Dr. Jignesh Patel, who's the VP CREDAI from Surat, also the MD of Tej Consultants. He has over 25 years of experience in architecture and urban planning. Uh, Also, as a panelist, would be joining us Dr. Vikrant Bhalerao, who's from Maharashtra Pollution Control Board. He's been part of the EV cell, helping develop the EV policy for Maharashtra 2021, and has interesting perspectives on how local governments can act to provide regulations for EV-ready buildings. Bringing the conversation together is Dr. Saket Saraf, who's the head of PS Collective with over 20 years of experience in India and US, focusing on urban planning and decision support systems. I am going to stop my intervention here, and I'm going to ask Dr. Saket Saraf to take over and take the conversation further. We can take away the slide.
Thank you, Ashish, for setting the stage for the conversation so nicely, and I'm sure we're going to have some exciting deliberation around buildings as a point of focus in the EV landscape. We know that EV adoption needs a multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder engagement, and the success really depends on seamless integration between the cities, the discoms, the market, and technology. The policy landscape is very wide, given people are talking about EVs in grid, EVs in urban planning, EVs and technology, EVs in manufacturing. And today we would try to kind of restrict or bring back the discussion to buildings. So we would stray in one of these areas, but again, bring it back to what does it mean for EV-enabled building infrastructure? So the structure of discussions would be very informal. I will either pose a question or frame an issue, and then I'll just open it to the floor and request the panelists to kind of respond or share their perspective on that issue or address the question. Okay. So, and I would request the audience to kind of share their questions in the chat box. Mostly we will deal with it at the end of the discussion, but occasionally if one or two questions is very relevant to the discussion that is ongoing, maybe we can pick it up. With that, let me just kickstart the discussion with a provocative argument. Depending on who you talk to, EVs, electric vehicles, are parked for say 60 to 80% of the time in buildings, right? Be it at home or workplace, or maybe in a shopping and leisure place. That makes buildings a very natural place to charge electric vehicle, right? The car is parked in a building, and then you can charge right there rather than taking your car to a charging station, curbside charging station. Yet, when we look at policy deliberations around EV charging infrastructure, the amount of effort, money, deliberations on providing curbside and public charging station far exceeds any deliberation on how to make buildings themselves as a fulcrum point of charging, like as a core charge infrastructure provider. So my first question is, do you all agree on the need of buildings as a natural and a first point of entry towards charging electric vehicles? And if yes, why is the larger deliberation so quiet about it? When you look at city electric vehicle policy, state electrical vehicle policy, there's very little mention of enabling building through a formal code to ensure that our building stock is EV ready, right? So two parts. One is, do you think buildings are a natural place for charging? And second, why is a kind of a deliberation vacuum around it? So I'll start with say maybe Dr. Rahul to start, and then Mr. Vinod, and then Jignesh. Over to you, Dr. Rahul.
Thank you, Saket. And I fully agree that buildings are very key to EV use for reasons I'll expand on later, but I wouldn't say it's an either or proposition. We need both. So the focus they're doing on public charging is in some ways a backstop, because if people say I'm out of the home, now what do I do? So that's one of the resistances on range anxiety that some people may have. So that, well, yes, I may charge in my home a lot, but occasionally I will need it outside the home. Now what do I do? So that is one reason there has been fair amount of effort. It's not about right or wrong or first or second. We need all angles to be handled. But your larger point is absolutely correct. And buildings are where most people will charge, except niches. And that's another reason that there's been a lot of focus on public or non-buildings, because these niches in some ways could be early adopters. So fleets, buses. So buses would charge at depots, perhaps. So for them, it's easier. But if I now look at delivery companies, you've got the Swiggies of the world, you've got IKEA saying we'll use green, for example, electric, and many others looking at it quite seriously. So then the question becomes, are they responsible for this? Or is it going to be a public asset? Or how does that overlay? Bottom line to this is we will need different forms. And it all boils down to who's going to pay. Because if it's my own, and this is another reason we haven't seen so much action, is just that at one oversimplified model of the world, well, if you want to charge it at home, that's your business. What has the government got to do with it? Right. So just hire an electrician and figure it out. But as we know, it's not as easy as that. There are also grid implications. There are also sort of community implications, especially because we have to remember the modal form of construction in now urban areas, many of them, is multi-dwelling units. It need not be apartment complexes. It could be as simple as what you see in Delhi, which is what used to be a single home is now becoming 3 apartments stacked upon each other, is becoming a lot of the norm. So these conversations and planning towards these are very critical, which then boils down to also not just standards. So what are the instruments we're dealing with? Is it mandates? Is it facilitation? Or is it incentives? It's probably going to be a little bit of all 3 of them.
Thank you for that perspective and broadening the discussion. Mr. Vinod?
I think I would agree with Rahul, what he says. That fundamentally, I think one of the reasons I speculate why buildings have been, kind of left to fend on their own is primarily because they are difficult to interfere with, right? It's easier to think about a public charging infrastructure, make it visible, let people understand, right? So that's a good point. I think public charging infrastructure, as Rahul says, is very important to take away the range anxiety, especially if you're traveling outside the city. It is most critical, in fact. But your buildings are going to be the places where 90% of the residents will actually charge. And buildings also can be places where, as I said, and as has been found out also, that there may be even commercial charging possible in buildings which are available in the night. So buildings are very important. I think they need to be taken care of properly in terms of, as Rahul said, there are 3 elements. One is mandate, which is what I think ICLEI's work talks about a lot, about mandating in the building that so much percentage of charging should be, kind of EV enabled, EV ready, or, EV capable, whatever. And the second is definitely incentives. So incentives need to be worked out as to how you actually, especially for existing buildings, how do you make sure that there is something that happens? And I think there has to be some method that if I actually, as a EV user, want to buy an EV and I do not have a parking which is ready with EV capability, in that case, do I have a right to demand it? And I think some kind of a right structure with some cost sharing possible with the building owners, which actually could maybe benefited by some kind of an incentive, some cost coming on to the EV user itself, and some cost of upgradation of the related charging infrastructure coming on to the utility. I think these 3 things, that's going to be very important, because I should not be left hanging, around different kind of, bodies and different kind of institutions about how can I set up my charging station at home and, what to do. This should be kind of on demand availability if it is possible. So can we think of a structure like this? Looks like a distant dream, but it will be very useful if that happens.
Very, very interesting point to think about. I'll just talk about it a bit later. Dr. Jignesh? You are on mute. You are on mute, Dr. Jignesh.
Hello.
Yeah, we can.
Thank you, Tim Al and Nandini, to kindly join us on this occasion. I am a VP of CREDAI. You know what is CREDAI? CREDAI is a Confederation of Real Estate Developer Association of India, and we have 28 state chapters and 300 plus city chapters. So I am a vice president of CREDAI Surat. So I want to focus on one thing on a land. Land is a state subject, and EV charging station or any new infrastructure need a land. In urban area, if government asking for a 1 square meter of a land, there is a very crucial for a developers or a landowner to provide an extra land for any infrastructures. तो ये जो अपने यहाँ जो लैंड का मजला है, जो आप सब समझते हैं कि 1 इंच लैंड के लिए भाई भाई का खून कर देता है, और ऐसे टाइम में अगर गवर्नमेंट को ऐसा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर लाते हैं कि जिसके अंदर लैंड बहुत क्रुशियल हो, उनको प्रोवाइड करना है इन फॉर अ गुड इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और फॉर एनी रीजंस, तो ये जो आपकी हमारी जो बात है आज कि फॉर ईवी के लिए हमको ये जॉइंटली एफर्ट्स करनी है, डेवलपर्स, ओनर्स और आप जैसे पढ़े लिखे लोगों के साथ मिलके कि हाउ वी कैन प्रोवाइड एन एक्स्ट्रा फैसिलिटीज टू द पीपल कि ये ईवी के लिए प्रमोट हो सके. तो ये हमारा आज का जो सब्जेक्ट है, इसमें एक ही चीज में फोकस करूंगा कि भाई सूरत के अंदर इन गुजरात द अर्बन लैंड पॉलिसी जो है हमारी, अर्बन लैंड एक्ट, उसके अंदर से फ्रॉम द वर्जिन लैंड टू अ अर्बन लैंड वी नीड 7 years टू गेट एन अर्बन लैंड. तो ये 7 साल के बाद जो डेवलप करने वाली लैंड मिलती है तो उसको कोई कैसे दे देगा? तो उसके लिए हमको थोड़े इनिशिएटिव्स देने हैं, थोड़े मैंडेटरीज करनी है. तो हो सकता है हमारा तो ये चीज है कि अगर कल हमारे कस्टमर्स आके बोलेंगे कि भाई हमको तो ईवी स्टेशन नहीं होगा तो हम बिल्डिंग लेंगे ही नहीं, तो आप कुछ नहीं करोगे तो भी हम करेंगे, आपको कुछ करने की जरूरत नहीं है, आप 4 लोगों को कोई बोलने की जरूरत ही नहीं, हमको तो कहीं से भी लाके देना पड़ेगा. सो इट इज अ विन विन सिचुएशन. इट इज अ टाइम ऑफ, ये टाइम का एक डिमांड है जिसको हम सबको मिलकर फुलफिल करनी है. So I will focus in 3 things like how to get a land, how to give an incentives to the developers, so वो extra parking space और या FSI उनको मिले कि वो ये करने को तुरंत रेडी हो जाए. और एक अदर थिंग्स है कि जो लैंड ओनर्स है या फिर एग्जिस्टिंग बिल्डिंग है, इसके अंदर सोसाइटी को मार्जिन साइड के अगर हम ईवी वगैरह प्रोवाइड करने के लिए प्रमोट करते हैं तो उनको क्या टैक्स में बेनिफिट होगा, उनको अगर गवर्नमेंट, लोकल गवर्नमेंट कुछ टैक्स बेनिफिट्स देती है तो वो करने के लिए राजी होंगे कि नहीं. तो जैसे ये जाएगा सेशन, विल डिस्कस ऑन दिस 2-3 थिंग्स हम लोग डिस्कस करेंगे. थैंक यू.
Thank you, Jignesh ji. So great, good start. I think Rahul says buildings are part of a larger solution, not the solution, which is very good. We know this saying, right to charging and like right to walk is something that government of Punjab is talking about. So I think right to charging gives a peace of mind to any potential EV buyer. And then Jignesh ji is bringing this dimension that land is a very precious commodity. And if you just say, 5 parking lots is gone for EV charging in a plot, then how does it make business sense to do that, right? So clearly the issues are very complex. Let me jump to my second topic, that if we were to formalize, right, a code that requires new buildings and perhaps existing buildings, which is far more complex, but let's stick to new buildings, to be EV charging infrastructure ready, then we need to have some consensus on how many chargers, how many parking spaces, what type of chargers, right? Who pays? Is it the developer who pays upfront? People come and they install the chargers over time. So there are a number of variables, and these variables are evolving depending on EV adoption rate, depending on technology transformation. So there's also risk of a technology lock-in. There's a risk of investment lock-in. We don't know what things will be 10 years down the line, whereas the buildings have a lifespan of, say, maybe 25 to 40 years, right? So there are lots of variables, a lot of risk of lock-ins and things like that. So in such a dynamic environment, how can we think of a kind of a mandatory code or a prescriptive code? Can it be incremental? As Ashish earlier pointed out, can we think of buildings as capable? And by capable, it means that over time you install the infrastructure, but whatever bare minimum is provided, maybe like a transformer load is there, but you don't do the wiring and you don't install the charger, or you just do a EV ready where you do the wiring and provide a plug and chargers come later, or you supply a EV ready, EV installed building where you do walk the whole 9 yards, right? So two parts of this question. One, how do we decide what needs to be done in this ever-changing landscape of EV charging, right? And what modes of provision should we require for new buildings? And then how do we extend this to existing buildings, right? And one more layer of complexity is that you make a code now, but after 5 years, 10 years, again, the EV landscape changes, right? So then you come back and revise the code. So all of these things, I'm just bundling them together and I'll open it to the floor. I see Dr. Vikrant has joined us. Welcome, Dr. Vikrant.
Very good morning.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. We know that you had a very busy schedule today morning, but still you could make it. We are very happy.
Thank
So
you.
I will just very quickly recap. We were just talking about buildings as being part of the larger solution before you joined. And currently we are talking about if we were to go from a building code compliance way, how do we decide, what parameters should the code address? So with that, I will open it again, and maybe we'll follow the same order and then reverse it from the next question. So Dr. Rahul, over to you.
Thank you. I think we'll have to see what works because there's no one model that will work the best. As Dr. Patel said, if consumers are really asking for it, then we don't need to have this conversation. So that will also happen a little bit later. But when we talk about the capable model, I both like it and get very cautious with it because what does capable mean? There is a whole spectrum that needs to be evolved. It's not so simple that you say that the transformer needs the capacity because that's a cost, maybe borne by the DISCOM, but in apartment complexes, that is borne by the apartment, in fact, in many states. So then what do you size it for? That depends on duty cycle and also charging speed. So now if people are buying fancier cars that have level 2 plus sort of charging capability, then instantaneous load that an EV provides is typically higher, or these fast charging for four-wheelers would be higher than the load from the households from that area. So now you're talking about substantial infrastructure requirements. To have the model that says you need X% EV, I'm very cautious of. The government has mandated that in a new apartment complex, X% must be for visitors. That itself was a hit. Developers had to carve out land for that, which reduced how much they could build. So there's a pro and a con, but the benefit is you don't need street parking then. So here also, if you say I need X%, so my apartment complex has 3 EV spots. There's a third-party provider and nobody uses them. Because people don't want to go to a spot, X hours later, bring it back. Because they've already paid for, to the builder, their own personal parking spot. And in the long run, we will have to come up with a solution that says, look, you can charge where you park, because that ultimately, I think, is what people want. Now, should it be mandatory? At the extreme end, you could mandate that every parking spot in any apartment complex or wherever has to have an EV charging facility. That's also expensive. So this hybrid solution where we get at least the trunk line, upgrading a transformer is relatively easy when you need it. Upgrading the wiring is actually much harder because of aesthetics, safety, and a bunch of other reasons. And so the model we're looking at is saying that, look, get a trunk line that's shared, but the spur, the meter, and the incrementals are all borne by the end user who wants to get an EV.
Fair enough. Mr. Vinod?
I would, again, I think, I have to agree with Rahul that this is how it should be done. Transformers can be upgraded later. I think some kind of a wiring, or even, putting through kind of a channel for wiring, because I think the problem is the reconstruction of the pillars and the walls and the other structure which are required, right? If you even put a channel and put the wiring later, that's fine. But you should plan for 100% of the parking bays to be EV ready, right? The second is we don't need to do fast charging, I think, at home. So you should plan for 3 kilowatt, maximum 7 kilowatt, but I think 3 kilowatt kind of a possible chargers coming up. As and when they come up, you give them the connection. The metering and the charging, infrastructure can really be the user's charging infrastructure. So you don't need to really have charging infrastructure set up there right from beginning. You just need to provide the possibility of a socket. And then the meter and the charging infrastructure could really be put on the EV user whenever it's actually needed. The other element that will come in these buildings will be that how would you sequence and schedule these chargers, right? So some kind of a smartness, some kind of a controller, and the building controller can come into play as and when the number of chargers increase, and then you can have a kind of a management contract with the charging, chargers. I mean the EV users, essentially speaking, where you could actually have this, that you could smart charge and help them charge the fully, but in some sequence so that the load doesn't increase on the building beyond a certain level. That could be done along with the utility in some sense. So I think new buildings, my sense is that if you really are looking at a completely EV enabled infrastructure, then you can't say only 40% or 20%, because today's 20% will soon, hopefully, once the EVs become very competitive and let me tell you that I have talked to so many EV users, and once you start using EVs, I do not want to go back to ICE EVs at all, right? Because they're so easy to drive, so good to drive. And therefore, as a user, you would like that if others have got it, I also want to get it. So why limit to only 20%, 40%? I says that in terms of capability, it should be 100%. In terms of being make it ready as and when needed. So that's the I think the strategy that should be adopted.
Dr. Jignesh.
Yeah. As I said, urban land is very crucial. So we can make a model in a different way, that some part is promotional and some part is mandatory. I want to talk about my GDCR, General Development Control Regulation in Gujarat. We have a 20% of parking of our built up area. हमारा जो built up area है, floor space index का 20% हम FSI का parking छोड़ते हैं. अगर गवर्नमेंट ऐसा बोले, रिवर्स कर ले कि और 10% छोड़ो, हम आपको 4 times FSI फ्री दे देंगे. You need an extra space to make an EV charger, क्योंकि जो जनरल पार्किंग रिक्वायरमेंट है जो व्हीकल रखने की, अगर ईवी स्टेशन रखेंगे तो थोड़ा जगह बढ़ 1.5 1.2 टाइम्स बढ़ जाएगी. तो गवर्नमेंट हैज टू डिसाइड ऑन अ प्रमोशनल बेसिस कि अगर मैं 20% पार्किंग से अगर 30% देता हूं एंड 10% मैंने पार्किंग कर दिया, तो रिवर्स कैलकुलेशन को एफएसआई कितना फ्री मिलेगा, तो वो करना चाहिए. तो ऐसे एक आप मॉडल बनाइए जैसे इंसेंटिव मिले. इन अदर वर्ड्स अगर बोले तो वी हैव एन पेड अप एफएसआई नॉर्म्स कि अगर मेरा बेस एफएसआई इज 1.8 और 2.7, मुझे अगर फ्लोर एफएसआई कंज्यूम करना है, तो आई हैव टू पे टू गवर्नमेंट 40% ऑफ द लैंड प्राइस. मुझे 40% लैंड प्राइस पे करनी है. अगर मुझे बिल्डिंग 10 माले से 15 माला बनाना है, तो 5 माला का गुजराती में बोले तो परवानू है. सो व्हाट वी कैन डू, अगर ये पार्किंग पहले प्रोवाइड करते हैं तो यू कैन एग्जेम्पशन इन दिस पेड अप फैसिलिटीज. 40% से आप 20% ले जाओ कि अगर आप ईवी चार्जेस के लिए अगर एक पूरा बेसमेंट या कोई फ्लोर छोड़ते हो, तो आप 40% जगह 20% आप एफएसआई का करो. बिल्डर को 2 चीज है कि इनका जो एक जगह है उसको ऑप्टिमाइजेशन करना है. उनको ये देखना है कि अगर जो भी कोई प्लानिंग हो उसमें मेरी लैंड वेस्ट नहीं हो. गवर्नमेंट कुछ भी मांगे मैं दे दूंगा, पैसे की बात ही नहीं है। अगर हम लोग ये बात करें कि ईवी चार्जिंग स्टेशन की कॉस्ट ये बढ़ेगी, वो बढ़ेगी, वायरिंग की बढ़ेगी, तो डेवलपर्स को इतने बड़े प्रोजेक्ट में फर्क ही नहीं पड़ता है। इनको जो फर्क पड़ता है यूटिलाइजेशन ऑफ स्पेस। आप उनको स्पेस के सामने से क्या इंसेंटिव देते हो, कितनी एफएसआई देते हो, उनको बहुत जरूरी बात है। और हर सिटी के अंदर पेड एफएसआई के नॉर्म्स है, तो यू हैव टू प्रोवाइड एन एक्स्ट्रा एफएसआई। दैट इज माय फर्स्ट पार्ट। सेकेंडरी, समटाइम्स एन एक्स्ट्रा पार्किंग की जो जगह है, द गवर्नमेंट इज कैलकुलेटेड इन अ बिल्ट अप एरिया। तो ये जो ईवी चार्जिंग की जितनी जगह वो बिल्ट अप एरिया से माफ मिलनी चाहिए, उनको एफएसआई में कैलकुलेट नहीं करना। कहीं भी प्रोवाइड करिए, फर्स्ट फ्लोर पे करे, फोर्थ पे करे, टेरेस पे ले जाए या बेसमेंट में ले जाए, उसका एफएसआई में कैलकुलेट मत करो। डू नॉट कंसीडर इन हाइट ऑल्सो, उसको हाइट में भी कंसीडर मत करना करो। अगर इनकी मैक्सिमम हाइट जो एयरपोर्ट अथॉरिटी जो देती है, इसके अंदर इनके बिल्डिंग है, और अगर उन्होंने एक फ्लोर ईवी स्टेशन के लिए सेकंड या फर्स्ट फ्लोर डाल दिया, अगर इसके लिए प्रमोशन के लिए, अपने लोगों के लिए, डेवलपर्स के, फ्लैट ओनर्स के लिए, तो हाइट से भी मिलने चाहिए। तो ऐसे बहुत सारे जीडीसीआर में प्रोविजंस कर सकते हैं कि जिसमें डेवलपर को ऐसा बोलिए करने में क्या फर्क है, एक स्लैब का ही खर्चा होगा ना, सामने से हम ईवी स्टेशन ला रहे हैं तो अपनी बिक्री बढ़ेगी फ्लैट की। तो ऐसे प्रमोशनल चीज हम ला सकते हैं। अगर फॉर लोकल पीपल की बात करें, सूरत के अंदर बहुत सारे टेनेमेंट टाइप बिल्डिंग्स है, मींस ग्रो हाउसेस आप बोलते हैं, बंगलो, सेमी डिटैच बिल्डिंग्स की बात है, तो उनका फ्रंट साइड का मार्जिन हमेशा खुला रहता है। तो गवर्नमेंट उनको फ्रंट साइड के मार्जिन में कुछ करने नहीं देती है। दे रिस्ट्रिक्टेड द एक्टिविटीज इन फ्रंट साइड मार्जिन। आप उनको बोल सकते हैं आप अंदर ईवी स्टेशन बना सकते हो, अदर देन पार्किंग आपका जो मार्जिनल एरिया है आप इसमें ईवी स्टेशन बनाओ, क्योंकि वैसे ही वेस्ट है। गवर्नमेंट फ्यूचर डेवलपमेंट के लिए मार्जिन रखती है कि अगर रोड वाइडनिंग अगर कुछ करना है तो वो कर सकते हैं। तो एट दैट मोमेंट अगर आपको प्रमोशन देनी है तो आपको इन करिए, और एक चीज करिए कि जो एक्स्ट्रा स्पेसिस है, जो कॉमन स्पेसिस है, इनका टैक्स लगता है म्यूनसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन के अंदर। हम लोग टैक्स भरते हैं, जैसे पार्किंग का एरिया है या फिर रोड साइड मार्जिन है, वो तो एग्जेम्पशन दे दो कि अगर वीज चार्जिंग डालते हो तो वो स्पेस आपको टैक्स से निकाल देंगे। आपका जो टैक्स का जो फॉर्मेट बनेगा, इसके अंदर ये जो 2.5 मीटर बाय 5 मीटर या 7 मीटर जो स्पेस है वो निकल जाएगी। तो आप लोकल लोगों को भी ऐसे प्रमोट कर सकते हो कि यू कैन यूज योर मार्जिन एज ईवी चार्जेस, एंड वी अगर आपने किया है एंड आपने गवर्नमेंट को ये आपका जो टैक्स वाले जो है, जो आते हैं क्लर्क, उनको बता दो कि हमने ईवी स्टेशन डाल दिया, आपको ये एग्जम्पशन मिल जाएगा। तो अब लोकल लोगों को भी आप प्रमोट करो कि भाई ये आपका लैंड है, आप यूटिलाइज करो, अपने लिए करो। जैसे हमारे यहाँ तो सोलर सिटी है सूरत, तो हमारे यहाँ भी आप गूगल में देखोगे तो एलिवेशन नहीं, बिल्डिंग का कुछ दिखेगा नहीं, सिर्फ सोलर का छपरा दिखेगा सबको। तो सोलर सिस्टम लोग लगा रहे हैं, तो अभी ये वेरी कीन की इजी हो गया। तो दो मैं जो बात बता रहा हूँ ये है कि अगर लैंड का छोटे छोटा ऑप्टिमाइजेशन करके यूज करना है, तो अब लोकल लोगों को, डेवलपर्स को पहले तो एक प्रमोशनल एंड मैंडेटरी दोनों स्कीम देनी पड़ेगी। द अदर थिंग इज कि थोड़ा ये आप रेवेन्यू मॉडल जैसे बनाइए कि अगर मेरे घर के आगे थोड़ी जगह खाली पड़ी है तो मैं किसी वेंडर को रेंट आउट कर सकता हूँ, मेरा मार्जिन रेंट आउट कर सकता हूँ। वो तो रोड साइड है, वैसे ही रोड साइड फैसिलिटीज पार्किंग की है अपने यहाँ। ऑफ रोड जो रोड साइड पार्किंग है वो बहुत कॉमन है भारत देश में। कोई भी अगर पूरा भी पार्किंग होगा तो रोड पे पहले छोड़ के चले जाएगा, देन वो अपना पार्किंग यूज करेगा। तो रोड तो हम आधा रोड तो यूज ही करते हैं। तो रोड साइड जो मार्जिन है वो रेंट आउट कर सकते हैं। अगर मेरे ओनरशिप का बंगला है एंड आई हैव 200 स्क्वायर मीटर ऑफ लैंड इन अ मार्जिन एरिया, और अगर मेरा बंगलो है मैं रेंट आउट कर सकता हूँ, और रेंट वो टैक्स में कैलकुलेट नहीं होगा। अगर म्यूनसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन वो 1.5 टाइम्स डालते हैं वो टैक्सेस के अंदर रेंट करी हुई जगह, तो आप उनको बात कर दो कि भाई आपके आगे कंपाउंड निकाल दो, 2 स्टेशन डाल दो, आप रेंट आउट कर दो। आप किसी वेंडर को भी दे सकते हो वो चीज, या फिर अपने पड़ोसियों को भी आप चार्ज कर सकते हो। तो बहुत सारे ऐसे मॉडल है, हम लोग बैठ के एक फॉर्मेट बना सकते हैं कि हाउ डेवलपर्स एंड लोकल पीपल ये एक्शन में आए। क्योंकि हम लोग जो है पॉलिसी मेकर्स हैं, हम लोग पॉलिसी की बात करेंगे, लेकिन लोगों को लैंड देनी है, किसी को पार्किंग का प्लॉट अलॉट करना है, किसी को जगह देनी है, तो उनके लिए बहुत क्रूशियल है। अभी हमारे यहाँ जो प्रोजेक्ट बन रहे हैं बिफोर 3 इयर्स वो अप्रूव्ड है, तो वो एक एक्स्ट्रा स्पेस भी देंगे नहीं, नए अप्रूवल आएंगे। अभी जो नए जो अप्रूवल्स मिल गए हैं वो और 4 साल तक काम करेंगे वो प्रोजेक्ट्स, तो वो 7 साल तक आपको जगह नहीं मिलने वाली। तो हमको पहले 5 साल 7 तो ये प्रमोशनल ही डालना है। जैसे ग्रीन बिल्डिंग का रेटिंग देते हैं वैसे ये ईवी वाले को कुछ रेटिंग दो, एफएसआई नॉर्म्स बदल दो, उनको फ्री एफएसआई प्रोवाइड करो, या फिर इसको कुछ टैक्स बेनिफिट दो। तो मेरा ये मानना है कि इट इज इजी अगर लोकल लोग और डेवलपर्स को साथ में मिलकर चलेंगे। हम लोग एक्स्ट्रा फ्लोर का स्लैब कास्टिंग में खर्च नहीं है, जो है वो सिंपल सा लैंड एलोकेट करने में है, और उसका जो ऑप्टिमाइजेशन करना है कि हमारी जो एफएसआई वाली जगह है वो वेस्टेज नहीं। So we can do with join hands with government and the local people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jignesh. Very insightful points, how we can really make use of every inch of land and make it profitable both for the owner and the larger public. Dr. Vikrant, your perspective on this issue.
Hello, good morning, everybody. So definitely we are today talking about the infrastructure aspect of to promote the EV transition. So while working on the Maharashtra EV policy, we set a very steep targets and we focus mainly on the urban agglomerates. So in urban agglomerates, there are mainly two types of two distinct types. One is like we are talking about a residential charging, which may not require immediate upgradation in terms of in infrastructure, in terms of a transformers or cable layout. But when we are talking about dedicated commercial charging spaces, there will be definitely going to upgrade need of upgrade in terms of a transformer as well as cabling, etc. And I think CPOs will pay for the same thing. In terms of residential charging, Maharashtra mandated 20% parkings to be EV ready right from 2023 onwards. Currently, I'm working with a pollution control board in terms of consents or the environmental clearances which we award to the new projects. For them also, we have put these kind of a condition that there should be minimum 20% of EV vehicle charger ready parkings. In terms of institutional as well as the commercial complexes, we put a condition of a 25% in this case. Meanwhile, when we are talking about when we are talking to multiple entities, government parties, we observed that there has been a discussion regarding the whether we can give some additional FSI or TDR, and these discussions are currently happening at a UD level. There has been one positive thing happened immediately after the rollout of a EV policy, that government announced the property tax rebates for the properties which are complying that 20% norm, 20-25%. Then there was some ambiguity regarding a lending of a common space of a residential projects to third-party charging operator, CPOs. So that was one of the key discussions, and there was I still recall there was a discussion happened with a registrar as well as at a UD level also, and based on one circular published, that ambiguity was totally resolved. So societies will they can appoint third-party CPOs, and whatever the resolution or anybody having a problem raising the question, that will be resolved at a registrar level. Then there was another issue regarding the fire NOCs for these buildings, which is one of the big. So for that, various urban agglomerates has created the EV cell, dedicated EV cells, in which the fire department is also a part of it. So a single window clearances will be there or is currently happening at least at Mumbai, Nashik and Pune level, because they are having a working EV cells. So this fire NOC problem has been resolved in there. Then MSCDCL initially raised the issue regarding charger connections, individual charger connections. So Mr. Bhalerao is having a flat and he want to put up a charging charger in his own parking lot. Then there was some issues raised by MSCDCL regarding how we can give a connections and everything. So later on it was resolved internally itself, but there was initially this issue. And regarding how to meter, I think third-party CPOs operating in the residential buildings will be one really nice move or nice business opportunities as such, because currently the dedicated charging station may not be commercially viable, but this kind of a business model, that is putting up chargers by CPOs in the residential building, may be a viable business opportunity. Then in case of any public parking spaces which is allocated by bidding process by urban local bodies, they have to give a free parkings to all EVs. So this is one of the initiatives taken by Maharashtra governments to promote the EV transition. So I think that's it from my side.
Thank you,
I had,
Dr. Vikrant. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Then
No, I have
Rahul
just,
also had
just,
a raised up.
Yeah, I also so just a bit of a comment here, not comment, but I mean, all very interesting ideas, Dr. Patel and Dr. Vikram Bhalera. But one question, that especially for residential parking, or in office also, wherever parkings exist, I think you don't need to create another parking for EVs. So there is no additional space lost. What you need to do essentially is that wherever parkings are happening, you should be able to provide a charging point and essentially a socket, right? The charging equipment essentially, slow charging equipment for cars or for even two-wheelers is a small wall-mounted or, easily, kind of created structure, right? So it doesn't need extra space and therefore a need for extra space even for that parking. So I think what we need to make sure is that all the parking bays, wherever they are, the existing parking bays or the existing parking bay design itself get ready. Now you can actually have, let's say, a socket in the floor. You could have a socket on the wall, or you can have a socket on the pole, however, you structure it, right? That's all what you need. The chargers for cars, for two-wheelers will be there with them. They're all 3.3 kilowatt socket ready chargers for scooters as well as for cars. And they can park there. So, they can park and charge there. So I think the only place where you may need additional charging is that if you want to provide, let's say, for visitors who are coming there, the vendors who are coming there, you want to provide charging there, and they have to be fast chargers. Then they can be in the visitor space. A few chargers could be created, which are fast chargers, which the vendors, when they come, for example, as a delivery boy and needs to charge, then he can charge, and RWA can get some money and the CPO can get some money, and people can still get facilitated. But I think for private parking, there is no real need for extra space. You just need to get them enabled, ready for, not even ready, and capable of charging.
Thanks. Yeah, Rahul, you have your hand.
Just fully in agreement, except this point that we pushed back on, which is, do we need extra per se? And I want to just add a word of caution that we don't want mandates unnecessarily without looking at a systems level view. National Building Code years ago, for some years, had a mandate for a helipad for every building above a certain height, and never got used because DGCA would never give a clearance. It takes 24 hours to get DGCA to allow their damn helicopter to land. So good intentions are one thing. Dr. Bhalera, I would strongly caution, like when you say 20% EV ready, there's a lot of systems level thinking that you would need to do on what does it mean to be EV ready and who's paying what, how much, and so forth. It's the right direction, but there is some things to be done. The last observation, and this comes back to Ashish's points in the opening, a majority of our EV is actually two-wheelers or delivery or fleet. So we do want to think about these first, just because that's where the demand is. Jignesh Bhai sort of said that when customers ask for it, well, it's going to be these things that really need it first. So let's worry about them. And the needs for a car park, like Vinod said, ultimately it's going to be wherever you park is where you want your charging to happen. But that's not necessarily true for two-wheelers, which have often not had a dedicated spot or dealt with other sort of jahan bhi jagah wherever you find a spot is where you need to go. So I think this is a larger discussion, but a very important one.
Thanks. Ashish, how are we doing on time? Do we need to wrap up? We have 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
I think we have, we said with flexibility, we can be up till 12:10. So we still have 5-6 minutes
Okay,
to continue the conversation.
Okay, so now what I would do is I would have like more targeted questions to each of you in the interest of time. I would have ideally liked to open it up, but let me just ask one question, a specific question to each of you, and then we would wrap it up. So first to Mr. Vinod. What are the technology developments on the horizon, that can change the deliberations we are having or the way we are currently looking at EV?
So two technologies that are of interest that we have kind of looped in. DST was working on them. They're essentially universal socket type idea, right? Now a universal socket, essentially, whether it's AC type or DC type, so both are being looked at. I am more inclined to think that a universal socket of the AC kind is much better. Now then what happens is that the socket is just providing electricity connection, right? The charger has the intelligence. So charging gun that you carry with you, small charger, whatever, charging cable that you have, that carries the intelligence to, first of all, meter, to give an indication that we are starting, whether the electricity can be switched on and off, that signal can be provided from this cable, right? So then these sockets can be universally made available wherever electricity connections are available, on those walls, on those poles, on those any buildings, outside walls. You can have a socket clearly coming through where the metering gets done as the signals come from the cable. So this is a very interesting, idea. If that gets implemented, then you can have widely spread charging points, and the charging can be done based on your mobile. You have a UPI kind of a technology being developed like UEI, which is based on the ONDC framework. So currently, for example, each charging point operator has its own, kind of a wallet and known application. You have to actually download that application, then actually start charging, right? This UEI essentially would be an interface which is work like in UPI. And when you wanting to charge, the nearby chargers will be displayed on you who actually want you to offer. They can be private chargers, public chargers, whatever kind of chargers. And then you can select one of them and take a common payment method and just do it, right? So these are some very interesting ideas which, if implemented, will make widely available charging across the city quite easy. But on the other hand, the buildings will still need to be made ready, so sockets will still need to be provided wherever they need to be provided. But yes, this will make it much easier to charge.
Thanks. Dr. Jignesh, can you share some insights on compliance? I know Dr. Vikrant talked about EV cell and single window clearance, but EV infrastructure compliance is adding one more layer of compliance cost to a developer in terms of time, resources, right? And the complexity, because it's not just the municipal corporation, but the fire department, the electric safety, and so on. So what are your views on this?
So we have a national building code. So Gujarat has implemented the national fire building code, and they have one policy looking to this, like EV stations, कि जो हमारी जो बेसिक रिक्वायरमेंट्स है पार्किंग के अंदर, तो बेसमेंट पार्किंग और वगैरह में तो हम लोग फायर का प्रोविजन रखते ही है. सो अदर फॉसिल फ्यूल का भी ध्यान रखना है या फिर ईवी का है, सबके लिए फायर पॉलिसी तो एक ही है. हमको तो फायर का जो प्रोविजंस देने हैं, स्प्रिंकलर्स देने हैं या जो देने हैं, या वाटर टैंक्स देनी है 20,000 लीटर की, जो कुछ देनी है वो तो हमारा सेम ही रहेगा. सिर्फ इनको ये देखना है कि इन केस ऑफ ये जो शॉर्ट सर्किटिंग का जो बात है वो ऊपर तक नहीं बढ़े. समझो बेसमेंट में है या किसी जगह पे लोड बढ़ने से अगर ये शॉर्ट सर्किटिंग आगे बढ़ती है और पूरे बिल्डिंग को अगर झपेट में लेती है तो एक क्रूशियल पार्ट हो जाती है. तो इट इज जस्ट एन एक्सीडेंट. तो इसके बारे में तो अभी कुछ नहीं बोल सकते, लेकिन सूरत के अंदर बहुत सारी जगह पे ड्यू टू ये हिट की वजह से टेक्सटाइल मार्केट्स वगैरह में 2-3 बार ऐसे आगजनी जैसा हुआ. लेकिन इसके अंदर कोई द डेवलपर्स और जो कोई भी लोकल है वो कुछ कर नहीं सकते, क्योंकि ये कब होने वाला है, कैसे होने वाला है, किसी के हाथ में नहीं है. बट इट इज स्टिल अंडर फायर एक्ट. हमारे यहाँ पूरा प्रोविजंस है फायर एक्ट के अंदर कि आप कोई भी बेसमेंट बनाओ या कुछ भी बनाओ जहाँ कोई भी फॉसिल फ्यूल वाला कोई भी अपना व्हीकल हो या फिर ईवी हो, आपको ये फायर का प्रोविजन रखना है. और अभी तक ऐसी कोई नई बात हुई कि ये इसकी वजह से कोई बड़ा हादसा हुआ है. लेकिन वी हैव टू लुक इन दिस, हमको फोकस करनी है कि इसको कैसे थोड़ा स्ट्रॉन्ग कर लिया जाए. और जो मैं तो इलेक्ट्रिकल इंजीनियर नहीं हूँ, ऑन डेवलपर साइड हूँ, तो उनके लिए स्पेशल केबल वगैरह जैसे बनने चाहिए कि जो ये इतने सारे ईवी लगने के बाद भी वो आग नहीं पकड़े। तो कुछ ऐसा कुछ प्रोविजंस होने चाहिए। बाकी फायर इज देयर एंड वी आर, हम लोग इनको ओबे करते हैं और पूरा फायर का जो है हमारे यहाँ मैंडेटरी है, तो करते हैं ये लोग।
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jagdish. Dr. Rahul, very quickly, can you tell us about grid readiness to support all these new EV-enabled, EV-capable buildings? And follow-up question is it something that the cities should demand out of utility, or is it that the utility will take the first step to say, okay, we would provide grid readiness for EV? So who makes the demand, and what are the impacts on grid?
So the second question is complex, so I'll give a limited answer, which is DISCOMs, utilities are mandated to do forecasting, planning, and integrated resource planning. Because it's not only that what do I do at the last mile, they also need procurement contracts to supply the load. So that's a long-term contract you will do with a developer, whether it's a coal or a solar plant or whatever. So this is not something taken lightly, and DISCOMs really do need to get involved. Problem is we have too much silo-based thinking and not enough interaction between the domains, because here you've got manufacturing side, MHI side, you've got NITI Aayog, you've got a lot of stakeholders supporting portions of this ecosystem. And fundamentally, this is an ecosystem problem. This is not something that can be addressed with one lens. So that's my answer to that one. The other one, in terms of grid readiness, we have a paper a couple of years back at our institute. It's on our website when we were still called Brookings India, put out. The energy requirements of EVs is relatively trivial. Not zero, but manageable. 100 billion units in 2030 is the demand from EVs if it's 100% two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, and city buses electric for sales by then, and with some growth over time to achieve that. So that stock is 100 billion units, or something less than 5% of your grid total. But the instantaneous requirement can be 50 times this in terms of the grid requirement if everybody plugs in simultaneously Friday 7 p.m. So this time of day issue is going to be critical to planning, and that also has huge implications as technology evolves, because faster charging is going to happen one way or the other. Now, of course, it'll start in luxury vehicles or buses who need it, who'll pay for it, where the incremental cost of that is low compared to the entire vehicle. But these also have grid implications as well as planning implications.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. I think that kind of very neatly summarizes a very complex kind of, not summarize, but gives insight into the complexity. And I'm sure this is a topic of further discussion. It may take a whole webinar in itself. So my last question to Dr. Vikram, right? We have heard from other panelists about on-ground realities, grid side, technology side, and even within the government machinery, the state government, the city government, the DISCOM, and then you have many other, like transportation as a part of this, the city government, and many other departments within the city, right? All of them are engaged. So you use the word called EV cell, which is kind of a place where somehow magically everybody comes together and it becomes a single window. So in your experience, has that worked very well? Are there other models? Are there mechanisms where all these agencies within the city and the state level can talk to each other, so that the end user, right, doesn't have to deal with all the complexity?
Yes, I think EV cell is really a nice concept which is being implemented currently at a Mumbai, Pune, as well as Nashik level, and it is directly under the commissioners. In case of Mumbai, it is under additional commissioner, and all required departments like let's say electrical safety, fire, as well as the distribution, they get a representative from various departments. So to create a single window, or to streamline the process of EV transition smooth. So this thing is happening, and somehow they are these cities, if you see Mumbai, Pune, as well as Nashik, they are really having a good penetration in last one and a half year. So which actually that credit goes to the EV cell for this, and I think that is a very nice implementable model for the urban local body. Similarly, we have a EV facilitation cell also, which is mentioned in the EV policy. Unfortunately, it couldn't material out as of now, but that is a macro level EV transformation planning for a state. And if at all similar, and there were many nice objectives laid out in front of that state level EV cell, like can we have a 15 finance commission grants to upgrade the upstream infrastructure, then have a state level charging plans, etc., etc. So many nice things were there for the state level EV cell. Yes, definitely, it will help out. One thing I would like to add up while summing up, means maybe not relevant to your question, is about the smart grid. So coupling the EV transformation with along with renewable energy, and having a discoms and well as various private as well as state level generating agency to redefine the macro level plan to mitigate the power peaks will be one of the interesting ideas whenever we are talking about a EV transition on a long-term basis. So if at all we are developing the infrastructure, we are developing renewable power, why not we coupled them together? That kind of a thought process.
Thank you. So I think we will,
I just
Yeah,
wanted to make
sure.
just a
Sure.
key
Please,
point
please.
on this. The smartness, I think, is very important in the grid to even be able to manage the fire, kind of incidences that are likely to happen. Because there are two ways the fire will happen around an EV. One is if the overload is happening in the grid, so some sparking or something happens. And the second is the battery itself catching up a fire because temperature is increasing, right? So if there is a smartness which kind of tracks this, and then some protecting kind of mechanisms which are available, that I think will become increasingly important for cities. So I think some further work needs to be done on what kind of a smartness and how to build that, and what kind of protection can be built around it. That's important, I think, because abhi to bahut kam hai EVs, but when they increase in the densities, this will actually become an important problem.
One more thing, Sanket, I missed out. I will just give you why EV cell is important. Back 3-4 months back, when there was a discussion in EV cell regarding the fires, EV are catching up fires. So the fire representative mentioned that currently the readiness of a fire department to put out any battery fire, maybe because of a short circuiting or thermal runout, whatever may be the reason, is very poor. They don't have a right technology as of now, and just putting up a water tank and all those things, that will not serve the purpose. Rather, it will increase because lithium will react with the water and generate the hydrogen. That means they pointed out these things. So there were a training as well as the facility upgradation program is being planned out dedicatedly for the EV fires. So that's why EV cell and other things come in the place.
Thank you for that point. So I would stop the deliberation. I would request each panelist to just say their closing remark in a 2-sentence or so, in the interest of time. So we'll start with Dr. Jignesh. Any last sentence, 2 sentences you want to add before we close?
थैंक यू. थोड़ा ये देखना है कि अभी तो आप जैसे बताया विनोद सर ने कि स्पेस इज नॉट मोर इम्पोर्टेंट देन द रेडी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर. तो इसके ऊपर थोड़ा फोकस करना जरूरी है. एंड द लास्ट पॉइंट जो रिगार्डिंग दी बैटरीज एंड जो वगैरह इनका जो है इक्विपमेंट्स, उनको कैसे फायर से बचाया जाए, तो ये जो टेक्निकल थिंग्स है इसके ऊपर ज्यादा फोकस करने की जरूरत है. बाकी जो डिमांड्स है उसके सामने जो सप्लाई करनी है वो तो ऑटोमेटिकली जैसे डिमांड जनरेट होगी धीरे धीरे सप्लाई बढ़ता ही जाएगा. एंड वी हैव अ स्पेस, जस्ट लाइक विनोद भाई ने बताया कि वी हैव अ रेडी बिल्डिंग के अंदर और एग्जिस्टिंग और न्यू बिल्डिंग के अंदर गवर्नमेंट की जो मैंडेटरी पॉलिसीज है अबाउट द पार्किंग, जो अगर कंपेंसेट करती है और अगर वो रिक्वायरमेंट फुलफिल होती है तो नई स्पेस की जरूरत नहीं है. और अगर नई चीजें चाहिए तो थोड़ा प्रमोशन के लिए अगर फॉर द टाइम बिंग 2-3 साल के लिए प्रमोशन स्कीम ला सकते हैं कि भाई ये अगर ईवी के लिए कोई करता है तो इनको ये एडवांटेज मिलेगा। तो इट इज एन वेरी इनिशियल स्टेज, हम लोग ये रिमार्क दे सकते हैं कि ईवी बढ़ने ही वाला है। तो नाउ वी हैव टू प्रिपेयर ऑन अ टेक्निकल साइड, थोड़ा ज्यादा फोकस करना है। ये लैंड हो, स्पेस हो या फिर रेडी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के बारे में थोड़ा कम फोकस करेंगे, लेकिन ये जो ईवी व्हीकल्स है उनकी टेक्नोलॉजी क्या होगी, बैटरी की टेक्नोलॉजी क्या होगी, और जहां हम लोग इनको इंस्टॉल करेंगे वहां ग्रिड वगैरह पावर मिलती कि नहीं, वो टेक्निकल साइड है, इलेक्ट्रिकल साइड है। तो मुझे लगता है कि वो साइड पे थोड़ा फोकस ज्यादा करना है, बाकी ऑटोमेटिकली ये डिमांड के हिसाब से होता रह जाएगा।
थैंक यू। डॉक्टर राहुल, क्लोजिंग वर्ड्स।
I think there's very little to add to the specifics, except that solving this is a process. It's not about a box that everyone just puts in as a compliance, because I use the phrase ecosystem to describe EVs, and that's really what it boils down to. We will not have one size fits all, or maybe we can. So there's always trade-offs. Things that are standardized become faster, but then you also lose nuance or lose use cases. So we need both a minimum level that can be standardized, but also more enablement of people who want to go faster to be able to go faster. So the apartments that are ready, the builders that are ready, the neighborhoods that are ready should be enabled to go faster, but yet that same speed cannot be imposed equally necessarily upon everyone. So this is an ongoing process, and it's been a pleasure to discuss this. We have not touched upon other issues, which is, we talked about grid readiness at a building level. We have not talked about the grid and climate. You're with Pollution Control Board. What are the other implications of EVs at a system level? So that's a pending conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rahul. Mr. Vinod, closing words on this.
I think I already taken a lot of time
Okay.
otherwise, but just want to say that this is a very important area. And I think, as Dr. Jignesh says, that we should have some incentives, some kind of a framework for even existing building owners to actually adopt EVs a little more strongly, and some kind of a mechanism through which they can take care of the cost if there are additional costs of retrofitting, although they may not be very high. And I think that for that reason, maybe it's a good idea to even estimate, what kind of cost actually could apply to an old building. And if they were to, let's say, propagate EVs and EV charging, and how they can be shared between the utility, the building, and the user. Right? So some kind of a modeling for that.
And we are really not, we haven't really done our homework in good data collection from bottom up and modeling and
Correct.
forecasting at this. Dr. Vikrant, last words, and then
Yes.
we'll hand it
So
over.
definitely the doubts regarding whether the EV transition will happen or not, that has been resolved. So we know that EV is a future, and rather it's a sustainable future, and everybody is gearing up. Private sector, government sector, both are now inclined towards the EV adoption. So in that context, we just need to ensure that whatever the infrastructure we will be building, whether it's in private sector or whether it's in a government part, it should be a future ready. So I mentioned about a smart grid. For that is a one point of. At the same time, there should be a plug and play kind of thought process should be there. Then we should identify the economic opportunities while going ahead, how we can actually think about maximizing the or having a economic opportunity, seek the economic opportunity. Then there should be a collaborative partnership between various government entities, then think tanks, private companies, all those. There should be a collaborative partnership while defining the infrastructure as well as having the transition. And lastly but not least, it's not today we develop some kind of a code, or today we develop some kind of a we standardize something. That's not, it's a continual transformative process. So it will keep on changing, adapting to a new standards. New batteries will come, new charging capacities will be developed. So we need to identify those and keep on adapting to a new standard. So that's what I want to put it into points.
Thank you. Great point. I will not risk summarizing it. It's a very complex discussion, very rich in contents. We'll analyze it. We'll hand it over to Ashish to kind of wrap the session.
Thank you, Dr. Saket, and thank you to all the panelists for taking your time and sharing your thoughts in what almost everybody agrees is an ongoing conversation, and we need to be aware and constantly engage and see how we can help build and create this infrastructure in cities so that the EV adoption that we are targeting, thinking about, happens on ground. I want to thank each one of you, Dr. Rahul, Dr. Jignesh, Vinod sir, and Dr. Bhalerao for joining amongst like all your busy schedules and sharing your thoughts. Dr. Saket for facilitating this conversation. You've been part of the journey where we have, interacted and engaged with stakeholders in Surat and Rajkot, trying to understand a bit of this puzzle and what we have learned. We have come up with a set of reports that we would want to share. I'm going to ask my colleagues to share the slides if that was possible. So I think for us, it's mainly this, that the conversation is ongoing and we will continue to hear and interact with different stakeholders, participants who are on this webinar. If you have any thoughts you want to share with us, points, we will be able to pick it up and come back to you. As next steps, I want to mention that this is part of a webinar series, and the next webinar that we are planning for is going to be focused on electrification of municipal fleets. We are targeting to have this on the 24th of May, and post that will be a webinar that will be focusing on EV, status of regulatory and financial ecosystem for e-rickshaws, the informal mode of transport in cities. Next slide, please. So just wanted to share these reports that have been developed. We call them amendments, recommended amendments for development control regulations for EV ready buildings in Rajkot and Surat. If you're interested, you can scan this code and you can access the reports. We'll be sharing them separately also on social media. This is a work in progress. Brings together all the conversation that we had at one time in the cities to understand perspectives of different actors and see if we could help the city understand what they could do in this direction based on the current status and the future plan that they have in place. And Dr. Saket was part of the team developing this. He helped us put together this set of reports. Also want to announce the webinar for the 24th of May. We are going to be talking about electrification of municipal fleet. We are telling cities that they need to take leadership on EV adoption, but what about the existing fleets that cities have? Would they be poised? Would they be in a position to decide how this existing fleet becomes electrified over a period of time? What are the key considerations? These are things that we're going to be discussing on the 24th of May. And we hope that you join us for this conversation. And if you have any interesting thoughts to share, do share about it. We're going to be also announcing this webinar on the social media. So mainly this, I think I'm going to ask my colleagues to take away the slide. And if all of you can switch on your camera once, it would help us to take a picture for memory of this session. Helps us with our records. Dr. Vikrant, if it's possible, you could switch on your camera for once. So it's possible that he's moved on to another meeting or something. We have, I think, pictures from the session as they were continuing. We just still take a picture and come back to you with some briefing of this session. Thank you so much. Thank you. everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.